Now, in a self-park environment, that's much more like trying to run your own Kubernetes cluster. You're fairly certain that when you first start off, you'll remember every time where you parked your car. But then you discover you parked your wife's car and your kids' cars, and suddenly you can't remember which car's on which level. You're not quite certain whether you configured it. Did you back up the keys so that if you forget to take the keys out of one of the cars, have you got a spare set of keys to go and get them? And your brain eventually just runs out of bandwidth. So you go and hire someone to run that cluster for you because you need somebody with a dedicated brain to keep this thing just working.
Hello, Nexters. Welcome to another edition of the Next Edition podcast, Next Pod. Today's guest is the one and only Mr. Bruce Devlin. Hello, Bruce.
Hello, Adam. How are you?
I am very well. I'm always happy to see Bruce at all times. So, Bruce, as we start this podcast episode, for those of the world that don't know you, which is probably no one, but for anyone who doesn't know you, can you please share a bit of a brief bit of your journey, so to speak?
Sure. Well, I always say to people that a career is what a car does before it hits a bridge, and that pretty much describes how I got here. I started off at the BBC. I worked on radio cameras. I then ran an MPEG chip design project team in France. I then designed standards converters. Somebody asked me, why doesn't this server work? And then I ended up creating MXF with about 300 other companies. Then I had to get it through the standards community, and that was fun. Then I ran standards for SMPTE for a few years, and then I set up my own consultancy called Mr. MXF because I thought I really ought to clean up all the mess I made as I look over my shoulder to the debris behind me.
That's very concise. There's a lot more to it than that, I'm sure. All right, you and me, let's do AI first, right?
Oh, I love the bit of AI.
A little bit. Let's do the industry norms. What do you think, right, about our growing reliance on AI? Do you think that might lead to sort of like innovation stagnation because we're reducing our understanding and our deep fundamental expertise in these subjects? What do you think about that?
Yes. Oh, you want more than that? Okay, right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's a fantastic comic writer who does XKCD, Randolph Munro, and he did a comic which I thought was wonderful, which showed the new age coder and how to do a Stack Overflow panic sort, which basically is you copy and paste sort algorithms from Stack Overflow until your list is sorted. And if it doesn't work, you panic your computer and error because the list is not sortable. And this is how I see AI and some of our reliance on AI at the moment. We're so trusting of the thing because most of the time it's very confident, particularly the LLM version of AI, that I think we're building up an inability for some people to think because AI does such a good job. Well, that's good enough. You move on to the next project. And so what it's done is it's increased their velocity at doing stuff, but reduced the time we have to think about stuff. And if you've talked to any journalists who are forced to try and produce content at AI speeds, one of the big complaints I hear from them is that they don't have time to think anymore. So, yeah, I think we're going to be building up a bit of technology debt until a crisis happens. I don't know when that's going to be, but I feel we're probably only 6 months to a few years away from it. And suddenly we'll go, hang on, we're just churning this stuff out. We should probably pause and think.
I think that's
Maybe.
interesting because if like the BBC just released that report about AI agents and testing AI agents and finding out that it was making stuff up and it was misunderstanding things. It was confusing, for instance, opinions for facts, and releasing this stuff in a newsroom. I mean, we've been working on AI agents, and there are certain places where you can use it like utility AI, right? So I can build a graphic from that's not really going to hallucinate. But when you actually start asking it to rewrite the stories, it's
Yep.
fascinating to see that that might actually be problematic.
Indeed, and if the person that's in the gallery or the editor isn't a subject matter expert on the story that's being written, you won't know about the hallucination until the what's the polite word for the vociferous feedback we see on Blue Sky and X nowadays? When that happens, that's the time when you realize that maybe the AI was smoking something it shouldn't have been smoking.
Blimey! Now there's a thing. Imagine what it does on that.
Yeah.
Okay, if we're going to use AI like this, it's really good at summarizing history, but so it's struggling to predict the future, I guess. So how can we ensure that engineers kind of maintain a understanding of the core principles?
Well, that's a great question. If I knew the answer, I'd be a lot richer than I am at the moment. But the way that I look at AI is it's really good at aggregating a very large amount of information and boiling it down and refining it to a small set of answers. It's really good at that.
Mm.
But when you try and have a problem that goes in the other direction, where it takes a small number of precepts and tries and generates truth from that small amount of precepts, that's when it seems to go completely haywire. So, for example, if I've analyzed a complete archive of media content and I want to try and see the best clips of people smiling, I've got some confidence that's going to work. But if I then tell a generative AI to take a static picture of an image and say, make that person smile convincingly, I have almost no confidence at all that I'm not going to get out something that I'd probably sort of arrest the person instantly because that smile looks like somebody's got something bad going on inside their heads. So when the information is going from many to little, I have some trust in AI, but the other direction, not so much.
It's interesting, like, we have a lot of, AI in our lives where it's on our phones and it's doing things in the background that we don't actually mind. I
Mhm.
think when it actually pervades into our lives and starts generating stuff and coming at us, then people get nervous about it because we are using a lot of AI every day, aren't we?
Yeah. And there's lots of cases around the world of where that's gone horribly wrong. I don't like to mention too many of the large American companies who remain nameless who provide systems to, for example, law enforcement that have biases built into their training models, where two people who are not white look a bit like each other, according to the AI, and one person gets arrested and might end up in prison as a result of these essentially cases that were invented by the AI, but its matching algorithms were close enough that that seemed like a good thing. Now, those are real models where you think, well, hang on, it's taking a lot of pictures and refining them down to a small amount of information. So surely, Bruce, that you should trust that. But the reality is, the decisions it's making are kind of the other direction. It's taking a single example of a single photo of a single person and trying to say, is this person like this generic blob of humanity that it had refined out of its consciousness? And I think trying to match that very specific thing against something that it's kind of invented, if we put too much trust in that, we're in danger. And we've seen cases of that in law enforcement around the world. And if we start putting that into our news feeds, where we invent stories because the AI wrote something about a photo it saw, I worry about that because every time that goes wrong, we're going to destroy trust in our news systems and the brands of the people who want to be the sources of truth. And that worries me. However, time pressure means that people are going to use this stuff.
Yeah, but I mean, it's because it's interesting. Like, for instance, particularly talking about scanning imagery, scanning archives, etc., to unlock archives. But what if you found amongst your archive a politician, some sort of protest many years ago, holding up a placard that says "No to this," and now they're trying to, promote this that they were
Yes.
against earlier, and you put that up on the screen, you upset the politician because they go,
Yep.
"Oh no, that wasn't
I
me,"
thought
and
I'd
then
lost that.
exactly. How did you find out with AI? Oh, right, we're going to ban facial recognition or something like that. Or it will just be dismissed as fake automatically. I mean, yeah, the last podcast we had on, we had this guy from Sasha where he can digitally watermark this stuff to do provenance of content. I mean, is that the solution, that we mark everything as being real, and then all the unreal stuff doesn't get marked as real, and then we sort it that way? I mean, how do we deal with the things we're losing here?
That is an excellent question, actually, because some of the stuff that people want lost is no longer lost because you can find it, as you pointed out, which I think
Yeah.
is hilarious. And I look forward to photographs of me from the 1970s appearing soon because those will be hilarious.
What did you
Um,
protest against?
the price of school dinners in Australia.
Oh my god.
Um, but other stuff that the hallucinations probably should be lost. But is provenance the answer? I think it's an answer. And if you think about what's happened throughout history, we've never really had an absolute source of truth at any time in history. We've had what the rich people in government and who are running countries and companies have been putting out as their marketing. And because they are audited, we've taken them more or less as a source of truth for the last few hundred years. But actually, there's always stories that creep out, despite the best efforts of those in power, that actually reveal that the source of truth but was perhaps not quite as truthful as it should have been.
Mm.
And I think AI will help reveal some of those stories, and provenance will help show that we had a good source of truth back in the day, from an archive shot in the 1970s on film or on videotape, stuff that was very hard to fake. And I think the modern equivalent of shooting like that is to put provenance into the camera feeds and all the sort of rushes that we would normally discard on the floor, but now live in an S3 bucket somewhere. I think it's important to have that in there. But a single number against a single frame isn't compelling enough in my book.
Mm.
But if you then, if you want to be audited and somebody goes back and finds that that single number on a single frame that says this is, this generally came from a Sony camera on location in, I don't know, pick a war zone. There's too many to choose nowadays. I can't think of one. That frame in itself isn't enough proof. But if the frames before and the frames after are available, and there's a whole bunch of stuff that's been shot across several weeks, and they've all got a contiguous or identifiable set of numbers like the one that is being used as a source of proof. I think that is what we need to try and establish. It's not an individual number against an individual frame, which is suddenly like, hallelujah, this is the source of truth, we've got it. But it's the context in which that number is presented, which I think is important. And that's really what we've learned through history is one letter from one person sent to one other person is easy to forge.
Mm.
But if that letter is consistent amongst a body of letters that those two people exchanged via a variety of different means, that's probably enough. I wouldn't say 100% proof, but to have a lot of proof
Mm.
and a lot more trust in that sort of data source.
Until you train an AI agent on those letters, and then
Absolutely. And then it's all gone to pot again.
okay. Right, I'm gonna shift the subject now. Um, there's been quite a lot of debate around this sort of cloud versus on-prem in broadcast and the hybrid thing. From your perspective, what are the key advantages and limitations of both of these ideas?
Oh, that's an excellent one. They're both tools. Cloud's a tool that allows somebody else to own the expensive kit that you don't understand. So it's a bit like a hotel in a way. You've got all of your infrastructure in a hotel and you pay per night to go and stay at the hotel. And it's lovely. Somebody changes the beds, makes the pillows, fluffs everything up. And you've got a lot of flexibility. You can change rooms anytime you like, and it's lovely. But at the end of the month, you look at the bill and you say, well, actually, I'm paying a lot of rent for something that if I own myself and my needs are quite simple and consistent and they don't change very often, all that flexibility and the ability to change rooms and to have, caviar every night when actually all I want's a sandwich, that seems silly. And actually, once you start putting things on-prem, the downsides people will tell you is that you need expert staff to manage all of that kit. But I'm not always convinced that that's a downside. To some extent, if you're managing that kit on-prem, you understand the risks of that kit. You understand what it does, you understand what it can't do, and you understand where the money's going, which means you understand much, much better about the benefits of the hotel if you have some kit on-prem, because otherwise you don't have any of that knowledge inside your business. And I've talked to a few people who've gone fully cloud and they tell me how wonderful it is until I give them a beer or two, and then they start to complain about all the things that have suddenly become unavailable to them, or suddenly there's been an upgrade and they're being forced to migrate to a new, different version of security policy that is completely inappropriate for them, but they have to do it because that's what the hotel tells them they're going to do with all of their infrastructure. So there is never a one-shoe-fits-all solution for any particular company. And I think what's really important nowadays for companies is to understand their needs. If their needs are unchanging, you know what? Having stuff on-prem is a very good solution because it's cheap, it's good, and you have onboard staff that know what they're doing. But if you've no idea what you're doing and you're going to change everything every 3 minutes, actually, cloud is brilliant. Those are the extremes, but most people are in the middle.
it's an interesting debate. I mean, even talking about hybrid solutions as well. I mean, the cloud is very good at elasticity and scalability. But like you're saying, if you're a 24/7 news channel, that's quite an expensive way to run what you're doing, especially with and the other elephant in the room is the availability of GPUs. And
Yeah, yeah,
the GPUs are not virtualized yet, so you have to have the card. And the cards they use up there are like for crypto, something they really over the top compared to what we really want to do. The
yeah,
simple
yeah, yeah.
life, the transcription, the translation kind of stuff. They're way over the top. Certainly from the last DPP leaders briefing, I noticed that there was a lot of broadcasters who were frustrated with these escalating costs. Well, why do you think these cloud pricing things become such a pain point for people? Are they just finding out, or has it always been like this, or is it just started?
So I'm going to put my developer's hat on for a second here. So any non-developers, I'm sorry if I start speaking Chinese.
Here we go.
But one of the things I've found is the faster engineers move, the more bloaty their software becomes. So I've got a particular application I'm trying to deploy at the moment, and if I just want to get this going quickly, I can get it going in about 5 minutes. But my single Docker image size is 2.9 gigabytes in size. And because of the way my app works, I have to have one of these pods or one of these images for every single user that connects to my system.
Hmm.
So every time a new user logs in, I've got to push this sort of nearly 3 gigabyte elephant around the place for this particular person. And I've spent the last 6 months re-engineering that because I thought, I'm a small company, that's expensive. And my new solution, I only have to push about 10 megabytes to each individual user because
Wow.
I've now carved up that big, fast, quick, easy to deploy bloatyware thing into what's actually needed for the users. So I've gone more slowly. I've really investigated the cost performance thing, and my code is now about 10 times faster. It's about 100 times cheaper, and it's actually really quite slick now.
Mm.
But that's only because I took the time to do it. So why
Yeah.
are people finding out that flexibility is expensive? Well, because you're pushing elephants around when really all you're trying to do is push around dimes. That's nearly always the first high level thing that's costing you too much money because you're over capacity for what you need.
Mm. And it's interesting because I always say that the internet and cloud fundamentally was designed for agile data, like like birds. Like it was designed that if your product blows up in Australia, the website doesn't go down; it reassesses itself and moves to Australia and takes all the orders and processes the credit card and takes the money. And all of this stuff is just kilobytes of data flying around.
Yeah.
But in the cloud, video is like an elephant, right? And we're moving these big elephants around. So we're right sizing, we're keeping the high res on-prem, and we're generating proxies, and and we're abstracting the high res from the. And sometimes I go crazy with how that works. I mean, we can do that in our system, but we see the delays that are introduced and all the rest of it. I'm not here to talk about my products at all.
Well, there's an anonymous vendor of cloud services, who I'm not going to name, and I said to them the last time they were trying to give me advice, I said, at what point does my 5 terabyte render become stateless? And as he parsed each one of the words in order, he went, "Oh, that's a big file." And that was his only response. It's like if he didn't know, couldn't answer the question, which was a bit sad.
Regarding software-defined systems, do you think that they're making technology more efficient? Or are they kind of turning, like, when you have a problem, when you have an outage, into like some sort of whodunit unsolved mystery? Because a lot of the stuff, particularly with containerized environment, microservice environments, it's like a whodunit when something goes wrong. For instance, if you glue together best of breed microservices, for instance, can you imagine the chaos? And I'm not trying to be negative here. I'm just trying to flag up that, as brilliant as this stuff is, there are downsides as well, aren't there?
Yeah. So uh, for the non-techs listening to this, I liken it to the difference between a self park and a valet park. The valet park is very regimented. They know what they're doing, and you are effectively on the outside of the parking, and everything happens under the hood, and that's like working with like a single vendor solution that does lots of things really well. You give them the keys, your car goes away, you ask for your keys, the car arrives. Fantastic. Now, in a self-park environment, um, that's much more like trying to run your own Kubernetes cluster. You're fairly certain that when you first start off, you'll remember every time where you parked your car. But then you discover you parked your wife's car and your kids' cars, and suddenly you can't remember which car's on which level. You're not quite certain whether you configured it. Did you back up the keys so that if you forget to take the keys out of one of the cars, have you got a spare set of keys to go and get them? And your brain eventually just runs out of bandwidth. So you go and hire someone to run that cluster for you because you need somebody with a dedicated brain to keep this thing just working. And I think that's the dilemma that people have nowadays. The best of breed kind of works, but it's not free. You do have to have the expertise on site to keep this pile of plates up and spinning. And as you said earlier on, when something goes wrong, it's not clear. You've got one error line somewhere saying your system has gone black to air. And then the murder mystery begins. It's right, okay, where's the lead pipe? Is it Colonel Mustard in the drawing room? What on earth was it that caused the system to go black to air? And you've got 100 pods to look through, filter through even one of the best search engines. You're going to be there a while trying to figure out, who done it.
Yeah, and all the logs and everything. Oh my God.
Yeah, don't get started.
No,
The
let's not
twitch
go
is
there.
started. The PTSD's kicking in. I'm sorry. Been there, didn't like it.
So, I mean, along these lines a little more, it's also about quality, maybe, which is that, we're there's an abundance of screens and there's an abundance of content on those screens in different formats, etc. But I think to a degree, there's some compromises in the quality of the content that we're putting out. I mean, not saying in terms of the production quality or the editorial quality, in terms of the actual technical quality. I think a good example is something that someone said in one of our earlier podcasts, which is that while the
Mhm.
broadcast end has to put out a picture that's perfect, the streaming arm can say, "Oh, they're used to buffering;
Yes.
they won't notice."
Yep.
I mean,
Yep.
that's starting to. Do we have different levels of tolerance? What do you think about that?
I think we do. We have very different levels of tolerance. It's cultural and it's genre specific as well. I mean, one of the interesting trends is if you go back and read the press of 2018 and 2019 and just pre COVID, it was all about 4K sports and high dynamic range sports and 8K sports. And you don't read much about that nowadays because you know what? When it comes down to watching a match, if it's a good match, 1080 even on a big screen is actually pretty good, providing it's progressive and not interlaced, because even then, it starts to look a bit funny. I have my limits. And the weird thing is, I mean, a little bit of tech in the background. If you are 1.5 times the picture height away from the screen, you can only see HD with your eyes unless you're 5.
That's exactly my point. I've said that there's a triangle. And it could be at a certain point in the room where it could be 720p, right? Still, with your eyes
Absolutely.
wouldn't be able to tell. It's
6H is
so
720p. Yes, I'm sad. I know these numbers.
yeah.
So really, when we're talking about quality, what we're really talking about from the professional point of view is quality preservation. Are we spending the right amount of money, putting the right quality down the right pipe to the right viewership? And it is variable. If you're watching via streaming on a mobile phone signal in the outback in Australia, where you're basically using Starlink to get the data to you, you probably don't want 8K HDR. That's probably too expensive for the value of the football or the sitcom that you're watching at. But you know what? QSIF is probably just fine, providing the audio is good. And that's another thing. We don't spend enough time making sure the audio is good. That's another story altogether. We'll talk
The
picture
most
quality for a
important thing
second.
in television is the audio, my friend.
It absolutely is.
You can lose the picture, just don't lose the audio.
One of my first weeks at the BBC in 1988, I watched the early HD broadcast of Wimbledon in quasi surround sound, and it was
Wow.
live at BBC Research and Development Department. I was like one of 5 people on the planet that could watch this thing, and my big takeaway is surround sound for tennis is just the best thing ever. And Boris Becker's shorts were far too small, but that's just something completely
But
different.
the picture didn't matter. The fact that it was in HD
Picture
didn't
didn't
matter.
matter.
That's interesting.
That ball was going to hit me in the face because I heard the bang when that person hit the
Yeah.
serve, and it's like, oh my goodness, this is terrifying.
It's something that people really, really don't think about. And I also think with social media, there's quite a lot of things that we could do to help with some of the audio issues that you sometimes hear on those positions, because it's a bit of a misunderstood art. But we could do a whole other podcast on that. So
Oh, we can. Let's book it in there.
I'm getting to the end now because we're running out of time. But looking ahead, do you think we'll see a major shift in how broadcasters approach their technology investments? So, like, will 2025 be the year of cloud pullback, for instance? Because a lot of conversations I have involve cloud repatriation, which was a word that I hadn't even thought about until 6 months ago. Um, so do you see like new innovations making cloud more viable, or are you seeing that it might be, I'm kind of got referencing the question earlier, but where's this balance and where do you think they're going to put the
So
money?
I think there are two meanings of the word cloud. One is a public cloud provider, even a private cloud provider who provides cloud services. And the other definition of cloud is using cloud techniques on-prem. And I think what we'll see is a lot more using cloud techniques on-prem, particularly when you're trying to move terabyte files or even go to some research projects I've seen where you're doing uh, time addressable content, I think is the way the BBC calls it. But essentially, rather than having a file based model for your stuff, you have an API based model for your stuff. So don't treat it as a 1 terabyte file. Treat it as an API access to get to the bits of that file that you need so that you
Mm,
can pull them back over a web service.
mhm,
Now, if you do that on prem as well as remotely, then actually what you're now doing is a cost decision based on do I have to get at a lot of big stuff locally or a small amount of cheaper stuff remotely? And you're basically judging where you store stuff and how you access it based on the costs of the links and the cost of retrieval. And actually, you can have an AI in the background who's really good and doesn't get bored, tracking that stuff and optimizing where stuff's stored so that as you start to address your content programmatically, you start to get a better view of the world. But that's 5 years away.
okay, that's a very interesting area. Actually, that it doesn't really tie in, but it's something that again that happened at the DPP Leaders Summit was somebody was talking about that like Fortnite, for instance, were releasing a new update for the game on the same day as the England match was happening, and the service provider for the fiber was running out of bandwidth, so they actually
Yes.
called them up and said, "Can you delay it till tomorrow so we can get the match out?" And to me, I find that fascinating because it's like an existential crisis in bandwidth. Of course, they're using dark fiber for all the production stuff. I get that, but if we all start doing small minority sports and we start pushing 4K over SRT over public fiber, and then people start pulling the file as 4K HDR also over fiber, will we just run out of space?
I'm- Space is not infinite. Now, an interesting sum to do in your head, particularly for streaming a live event like 4K sports, is the lower the latency and the higher adoption of multicast, the less the problem. Because let's say you're shooting at 50 frames per second and you manage to get the latency down to 1 second to everybody in the UK, or everybody in Sweden, or everybody on the planet. 1 second, that's 50 frames. Okay, that means you can service the whole world with 50 streams because the biggest latency's 50 and the lowest latency is 0. So if you can get the whole world to within 1 second of each other, then actually they're all literally looking at, oh, we've reinvented broadcast again. So,
That's
so
an
multi,
interesting angle.
yeah, multicast adaptive bit rate with low latency actually makes everybody's life easier because you don't have to stream so many copies of the stuff. And
So
people who hit
actually,
pause,
you solve the bandwidth crisis just with technology. So you're just streaming the bits that you need to stream. So you don't need to send the whole thing. Kind of
yeah,
is what we're saying.
and
Yeah.
storage for caching, to within a minute or two is relatively cheap.
Yeah.
And then the number of people who need to cache for more than a minute or five is relatively low. So you can do things at a system level. And if we lived in a world where actually there was one centralized streaming system that dictated to everybody how to receive the picture, like
Mm.
broadcasting of the 1950s, that would be
You mean a
easy.
standard, Bruce?
If I knew, understand, somebody say standards quick, the PTSD's kicking back in again.
Finally, the question that I ask all of our guests is either personally or professionally, Bruce,
Mhm.
what's the best piece of advice you've ever been given?
Stop talking and listen. You learn more that way.
That's the shortest, most concise answer I've had to that yet. I thank you for that, Bruce. Well, thank you for joining me. It's been fascinating. I literally could talk to you for weeks, but I don't think the viewers want to listen to that.
But I will listen to that rubbish.
Or the listeners, should I say. Well, thanks for coming on. I'm
My
going to
pleasure.
leave some details about Mr. MXF and also all the stuff about MetaX, which is very exciting, something that we also love. So thanks, Bruce, and we'll see you on the next one.
Thank you, Adam. Real pleasure.